Several months ago, right before COVID-19 hit, I participated in a pulpit swap with the Reverend Karen Bray from College Avenue, United Methodist Church. The week before, if you recall, I said here in this church that the pulpit does not belong to me, just as the altar does not belong to me. They belong to Christ. And as the pastor, I've been called to steward them. Today, we welcome Greg O'Connor, or should I say welcome back Greg O'Connor. He is no stranger to Riverside. He has worshiped with us before, and he is also one of our online worshipers every Sunday. Greg serves as the conference assistant for the Central and North Central districts in the Indiana Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. But our friendship and our professional relationship goes back even further than my time here and his time at the conference office. We worked together at the University of Evansville when I was doing chaplaincy work there. He's worked as a residence hall coordinator, which sounds exactly like what you think it means. It means he lived, looked after, and took care of how many guys? Close to 200 college-age boys. I think he should be nominated for sainthood for that. But I will say this, going back to our time in Evansville, I could not have done what I did there had Greg not been at my right hand. He was an essential asset to my ministry there. And I have been unceasingly grateful for that ever since. And so it's good to be kind of sharing the service again with him. On another note, I invited Greg to come and preach this morning because I don't know how many of you have ever been to a commissioning and ordination service at annual conference. But if you have been, you know that the very end of the service features an invitation for people to come forward who may be responding or feeling the nudge of God's calling them to ministry. And the first act of commissioned or ordained ministry in the United Methodist Church is for the commissioned folks in the ordinands to receive those who are responding to that invitation. To receive them, to welcome them, to pray with them, to journey with them in their discernment of God's calling. Earlier this year, Greg was up here visiting, and in one of our many deep, thoughtful conversations, Greg shared with me that he is also discerning whether or not God might be calling him to vocational ministry. And when I was discerning my call to ministry as a young teenager, I was so grateful for the pastors who opened their pulpits to me, even at 14, 15, 16 years old. Some of you might say they took a big risk in doing that. But it was so instrumental in solidifying my own call to ministry. I'm still so grateful for their allowing me to do that, for their encouragement, for their support, for their challenging me, for their calling forth the best from me. So I knew when Greg shared that with me, that he was discerning his own call to ministry, I knew right away it was my turn to pay it forward and to open the pulpit for him to discern this call in a very real and very tangible way. This is Greg's first sermon. He has never done this before. I guarantee you it will be better than my first sermon. And I know that you will be blessed by his thoughtfulness, by his vulnerability, and by his openness, and by his giftedness. So will you join me in welcoming Greg O'Connor to the Riverside pulpit today?
Wow, I have to follow up with that. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Greetings in the name of the risen Christ. My name is Greg O'Connor, and I serve as conference assistant for the Central and North Central districts of the Indiana Annual Conference. I am also blessed to be friends with Pastor Keith, who invited me to preach on this very special Sunday. Know that I consider it to be a great privilege and great honor to have this opportunity to be here today. Thank you so much. Will you please join me in prayer? God, our builder, our artist, our musician, the great creator. In this time today, please bring us a spirit of curiosity, a spirit to learn, to empathize with what we may not know or we may not fully understand, to dare greatly, to be brave. God, I have spent almost every day for the past 5 years hoping that my words are enough. May they be ever acceptable to you today. Amen. Esteemed author, the late Toni Morrison, once said that the function of freedom is to free somebody else. And I'm excited to share a little bit about freedom with you all today. So today is a very special Sunday in the life of the church, but it may not be something that we think about very often. Today is Stonewall Sunday, the 51st anniversary of the Stonewall riots. If you're not familiar, the Stonewall riots were a series of riots that took place over the span of 2 days, beginning on June 28, 1969 in New York City. These riots have historically been considered the very beginning of the fight for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community, more commonly known by the acronym LGBTQ. And that is how I will refer to the community, because saying lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer over and over takes a lot of time. So before Stonewall, the LGBTQ community existed almost like a secret society. It was illegal for men to dance together. It was legal to refuse service to anyone who may have been perceived as gay. And it was legal for police to go into bookstores and make sure that bookstores weren't selling material related to the LGBTQ community. So much so that these bookstores would hide the books in the back to make sure that they could remain open but have this material ready for anyone who would ask, but very carefully. So these riots began as a fight back against oppression. Immediately following the riots, activists and community members began to work for LGBTQ visibility, which resulted in the first Pride Parade the following year, and we commemorate this history by calling June National LGBTQ Pride Month. So, I've been to a few Pride celebrations in various cities around the country, from Chicago to Boston, but there's one experience that I feel most exemplifies Pride for me. Last year, I began my position as conference assistant on Monday, June 3rd, days before the LGBTQ Pride celebration in Indianapolis. So to say the timing of my arrival couldn't be better was definitely the understatement of 2019. That Saturday, I marched in a Pride parade for the very first time. I was no longer watching from the sidewalk. I became the act. I saw parents with "I love my gay child" shirts, dogs dressed in rainbow, people in elaborate costumes that took hours to make. Glitter was flying everywhere, and if you know how glitter operates, it's on the sidewalk still because it's impossible to get rid of, right? I saw teenagers who were clearly alone the other 364 days of the year, wondering if they would be affirmed. And on this one day, they didn't have to wonder, they knew. I consider that parade to be one of the holiest experiences of my life. To see the people most often cast aside in the name of religion, celebrating exactly who they were created to be in love and in courage, And it was a glorious celebration that I hope I never forget. And today, on Stonewall Remembrance Sunday, we remember the people who began that movement, because Pride is not just a parade. People like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Riviera, and many other names who we have lost to history, but their efforts are with us today. The LGBTQ rights movement is all because of brave people who started the fight for acceptance in 1969, and for those I will be forever grateful. The first resistors at Stonewall bore the fruit of holy resistance and bravery that I can only begin to imagine what it must be like to have. It is because of people like them I stand before you today. I'm an openly gay man. I have been out for over a decade, meaning it's just kind of a well-known fact at this point. And as Pastor Keith knows, I hold absolutely zero shame in who I am. I'm proud to be gay, just like I'm proud to be a writer, a singer, a brother, a friend. Proud of my Irish descent, and proud to be a Christian. Pride often gets a bad reputation in the Christian church, but I always like to challenge the notion that pride is a bad thing, because think about this. When you are proud of who you are and you share that with the world, you are sharing a part of yourself, and other people learn from that. And when other people learn from each other, we learn to love each other more. It's one of the sharing of yourself and being proud of yourself is one of the holiest acts I can think of. I know this because LGBTQ people take on huge risks to show the world who they are, much like the early disciples did in the book of Acts. In today's gospel reading, you heard a passage that is often quoted by both Christians and non-Christians alike. I chose this passage because I knew that preaching about the LGBTQ community and the church is especially challenging, especially when it's your first sermon. Before I go forward, I want to say this in complete empathy. If you have been taught that being LGBTQ is not a positive identity to hold, I ask you to please consider the modern reading. Is this really a debate of biblical truth versus biblical love? Perhaps the gospel lesson might ring more true, as it should for all of us, no matter what identity we hold. I think it would behoove us all to look at the log in our own eyes before we even think about talking to others about what we perceive are their own specks. And we could all afford to do better here. I focus on a particular verse here. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. And I like this because it forces us to reflect on the kind of fruit or the kind of messages we bear. No one here is a bad tree, let me make that very clear. But I ask myself every day, what kind of message are we as Christians sending out into the world? Especially to those who might be most marginalized. For example, I was not raised a Christian. It's been about 5 years. So my earliest memories of Christianity, though, come from my days in high school when I would walk down the hallway, and I was out in that period of my life, and students would yell the clobber verses, the 6 verses most often used when we discuss homosexuality in the church. They would yell those verses at me as I would walk down the hallway. That's my earliest memory of Christianity. In fact, before I met Keith, the only verses I had memorized were those 6 verses. My friends in the community have often told me the stories about how they only know Christianity to be used to degrade. And I don't want to judge or condemn anyone either. But I ask us as Christians, what fruit are we producing for the world? For years, the LGBTQ community has had to fight tooth and nail for their place at every table, in the church, in law, in politics. As Christians, I think, what would life be like if we invited them in first? I can assure you, being liminal in that I am both gay and Christian, I see the Holy Spirit in the LGBTQ community in every possible way, and our community spans across religious lines. The LGBTQ community is made up of Christians, folks who are Jewish, Muslim, who are atheists, but they all show amazing fruit by trying to love, even in the midst that they are told to not do so. So, I do not know any of you personally, but I want to make something very clear right now to any LGBTQ person who might be watching here or online. You are beautifully made, loved far more than I could attempt to measure. And whether you are out like me or you keep it hidden for your own safety, you are still fabulous. Y'all, I got really excited when I wrote that line. The lives of LGBTQ people are not a theological position that one can take. We are not an issue to be resolved, and we are not and should never be a subject for debate. If you have LGBTQ people in your life, I urge you this day to tell them that you love them. But more importantly, that you are proud of them. As Christians, we are unashamed of the gospel. So let us be unashamed of our LGBTQ family. Let us love them openly in the same way we love God. There are many reasons LGBTQ people can't be themselves, especially in church. These are the people I fight for. While historians believe Jesus did not actually say these lines, I often think of the fourth beatitude. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. LGBTQ people have come so far. We dance on God's great dance floor like everyone else. But we as Christians have so much left to do. I ask today, what fruit do you bear for the LGBTQ community? What or who are you proud of? What parts of yourself are you ready to share with the world? Pastor Keith has done a wonderful job at sharing stories of injustice and oppression, but also resiliency and hope. How will you use these? Will you use these stories to look at the logs, the things blocking your sight, before trying to change someone else? I hope so. Today we remember those who bore fruit of resiliency and hope. And as you go about your week, I hope you consider these questions that I ask the same way Jesus would question the Pharisees. Because maybe this world is far more complicated than we could ever give it credit for. But our love as Christians, the love that Jesus taught, could be part of the solution. For everyone born, a place at the table, to live without fear and simply to be, to work to speak out, to witness and worship, for everyone born, the right to be free. The function of freedom is to free somebody else. Let's use our gifts as Christians. Let us not judge or condemn things we may or may not understand. Let us not force or focus on the other when we ourselves need to improve. Let us use what we have to free others in the same way we are free. This is the fruit we should bear. Let us fight back against the sins of homo, bi, and transphobia. It will take love and it will take courage to turn away from judgment and to examine ourselves. But just like the people who began the LGBTQ movement, like that first brick that was thrown at the Stonewall Inn, we need holy resistance and holy love. to bear good fruit for the world, especially to those most harmed by the name of God. Let them know we are Christians by the fruit of our love. I believe, even in this time of divisiveness, that we can begin a new movement to change the Christian church forever. And I hope you'll join me.